Is that better?
Moment of calm. I think we're here now. We've arrived finally.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Let's talk about great online virtual events.
There we go. We promise that is not a reflection of our ability to do online virtual events. Sorry about that, everyone, and thanks so much for staying with us. Some quick introductions. I'm Sarah Custer. I'm Associate Editor Curation here at Times Higher Education. And joining me today is Tim Swula, who is our Head of Content and Engagement for our Summit Series, and Phil Beatty, who is our Chief Knowledge Officer. So it looks like we've got some good questions coming in already. Thanks so much, everyone, for bearing with us as we are getting that underway. Just to let a few more people stream in with some of their questions and to come and join us today, I do have one to just get us started that will, I think, will be a good setup for today's discussion. And it's for you mostly, Tim, just to talk about the history of this summit, the World Academic Summit, which is our flagship event, which originally started, I believe you started planning this probably 2 or 3 years ago, which was supposed to be a physical event in Toronto, talking ironically about the power of place. And it's now obviously transferred to something quite different from that. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about kind of the migration to this virtual event in the last few months?
Happy to, yeah. So the World Academic Summit, I think the first one was in 2014 before I actually joined THE. And it was always designed to be an event, a 3-day event aimed really at higher education leadership. And it was done in partnership with a host university. And the host partner university, we worked very closely over, as you say, 18 months, 2 years in some instances to sort of really, design a program that reflected both, their own interests and, the realities of their location and their research specialisms, and bring people together for 3 days to reflect and come together on those precise issues. And so we were to be in Toronto in a couple of weeks' time, and the president of Toronto, Merrick Gertler, is a human geographer, highly distinguished researcher in his own right, and so he really wanted to focus this year's summit on the power of place. And then clearly we've had to change everything, and we realized that we weren't able to physically go to Toronto. And so we began thinking about how we could produce a kind of online event that would encapsulate the best of our original plans, and then began to suddenly realize that actually the better thing would be to try and just create the best possible online event, and forget about trying to replicate a live sort of in-person experience, and really use all the new opportunities that we have from online functionality and the technologies that exist for networking, to really put together something that would cover far more content, cover far more areas than you can have when you're restricted to a physical location and one auditorium or a couple of auditoriums, and people all being in one time zone and not wanting to get up at 2 a.m. to discuss something. So we realized that we could truly appeal to the whole global audience, and now we've got 4 stages of different content coming on at different times of our day, to be the prime time, as it were, for whether you're in Australia or whether you're in Alaska. And it's incredibly exciting. We are still reflecting some of the discussions, so we are looking at the power of place and how that may have changed in light of the pandemic and restrictions on global mobility. But we're also, we decided to focus this whole summit really on this big question: is this a new dawn for higher education? And it truly is a question, because I think certainly for certain countries, certain institutions, it's not necessarily a new dawn at all. It might be for countries that haven't or are not expecting to see big drops in their funding going into universities. It could be a case of just changing certain models of teaching and learning, but more or less the core sort of practice and core setup is the same. Whereas for other countries, that are seeing huge drops in forecast international students coming in, for example, it's a whole new sector, really. So we really wanted to be able to create an event that as many people as possible could access, and interact with at their own time, and have the key conversations that they perhaps missed, over the last 6 months when we've all been stuck at home.
One thing that is staying the same, though, from all of the past World Academic Summits that we're doing is the launch of the World University Rankings 2021. And I would like to go to some of the questions that we have received in the chat. Just one quick housekeeping tip that I forgot to mention is that hopefully everybody can see the live chat stream on the left-hand side of your screen or the right-hand side of your screen. That's how you can submit questions to us, and we will be taking those throughout the time. So I'll go to the first one from Katie Osgood, who has asked, a large proportion of ranking is made up by the reputation elements. What can universities do to improve their reputation scores, especially younger or less well-known institutions? Phil, over to you.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Yes, around about a third of the methodology of the rankings is based on an annual academic reputation survey that we undertake. We get around 10,000 scholars a year completing the survey. We combine 2 years worth of data to have around 22,000 responses for this ranking that's coming out on the 2nd of September. It's peer-to-peer, so it's expert opinion, it's published scholars, so we know they have experience directly in the academic fields they're asked to talk about. And we distribute that in 14 languages to make sure that it's fairly representative of the true global distribution of scholarship. We use United Nations data to ensure we sample correctly across the whole world. But in terms of shifting reputation, I think we do have an issue. That reputation is subjective, but it's incredibly powerful. It has tangible real world effects on universities in terms of your ability to attract funding, your ability, of course, to attract student talent and academic talent and philanthropy. And there is a challenge that there are only a really small number of universities that have a truly global reputation. We've actually got a top 6 set of institutions that really do score very highly across the board, and they're in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's basically Harvard and MIT on the east coast of America. It's Oxford and Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and it's Berkeley and Stanford on the other side of the US on the west coast. And then the data flattens out very quickly. But we find that it's really about academic excellence. You can't replace academic excellence because we're asking peers, we're asking scholars who's doing great work in your field. You can only really achieve these reputation scores by doing some great work, but you can do that in a niche, you can do that in your specialist areas. You can look at pockets of excellence. And I think the things that generally make a difference will be things like your networks, your academic communications. It's not just about publishing journals. It is about shouting about those journals, pushing those journals out into other media. It's about being strategic in your collaboration. We have lots and lots of data that suggests, we know that University X is doing some outstanding work in physics, but nobody in University Y or nobody in a particular market is aware of that work. So how do you collaborate across borders? How do you network and communicate more effectively? That's a really big part of it. And I'm just going to say something controversial before I stop and let you move on to more questions. I firmly believe that marketing and PR is a big part of this. Universities are renowned for being truth seekers. They're not necessarily comfortable with the idea of, self-promotion, and academics certainly tend to be concerned about too much self-promotion. Marketing is often associated with spin and puff, but I think you have to tell your story. You have to sell yourself at the institutional level, at the leadership level. Universities do need to find what makes them distinct, what makes them stand out. Increasingly in this incredibly crowded and competitive marketplace where the need to draw talent from the entire world is really, really intense. You have to tell your story. You have to market yourselves. You have to make sure your scholars are communicators, your scholars are out there. They all become public intellectuals. And I think it's a massive part of the formula. So it's not a particularly easy answer, but I think there's a whole range of factors. But for me, connecting, collaborating, and selling yourself.
Yeah, and just related to that is the need for universities to really be champions of higher education, which is a theme that we've been talking about quite a bit in the past few years, especially at THE, just kind of how universities can shift the message around themselves and around the value of a higher education.
Yeah, and just to throw in, sorry, the pandemic, I think, has highlighted more than ever that universities are this profound force for good. They are going to have all the solutions to the crisis we're in, not just in terms of fighting the virus in terms of those who are affected by it, but actually producing the vaccines, but all right the way through helping rebuild societies, helping to get the global economy back on track. Universities are an amazing public good, and yet they're facing this extraordinary weird sense of attack. Lots of criticisms. Are they relevant? Are they producing the right graduates? Are they actually a public good? So it's a really important message to celebrate and protect and support and shout about the great public good, the impact universities have on the world.
Great. We've got another rankings question for you here, Phil, from Sonia, who is asking, do you think rankings should include a weighting of university budgets according to the purchasing power of the country they're in? For example, 1 million USD and is one thing in the US and another thing in Serbia.
Yeah, so I think there's a harsh reality with rankings that they reflect an unequal world, and the universities at the top tend to be super rich, your Stanfords and your Harvards with their extraordinarily huge endowments, well-funded universities. But we do in the methodology try and reflect those differences. So where we look at money, and our ranking is unique in world rankings, that of the 13 metrics we use to create the ranking, we do include metrics of institutional income, research income, and income from industry. Where we look at those metrics, we do apply a purchasing power parity normalization to try and level the playing field to some extent. But of course, the inequalities of wealth and the inequalities around talent mobility are replicated in the rankings. But that's something I think we really want to explore at the World Academic Summit, in the sense that does this crisis and the closure of borders and the rise of digital communication and digital events, does that allow for a really serious rethink of the global inequalities in terms of brain drain? I was on a conference call this morning at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, and there's a strong sense actually that the traditional global north exploiting the talent in the global south, there's time potentially to change that and to really rethink that now.
For the new people who have joined us, welcome. You've got a live chat stream on the right hand of your screen that you can use to submit your questions to Phil and Tim, and to me if you have any. Let's go on to the next one from Adrian. She is saying, given the current HE environment and global pandemic, are there any plans to change or add some metrics, perhaps to look at accessibility in terms of online learning and online student experience?
Yes, I think sorry, shall I answer that one as well, Sarah?
Yep.
Yeah, one of the things that we're looking at with rankings, we've now been producing the rankings since 2004, and the current methodology, which we're incredibly proud of, has been in place for over 10 years now. So we are reviewing the methodology to see if it's still fit for purpose. Universities don't stand still. Our ability to capture data evolves. So we're looking at a review of the rankings that we're calling Rankings 3.0, and we will be discussing that at the World Academic Summit on the 1st and 2nd of September. We have lots of workshops. We have our data team involved in live workshops and multiple sessions, as well as the launch of the rankings. But the other thing that's really been important in terms of how we approach rankings is the development of our impact rankings. And we do really feel passionately that the impact rankings are a way of reassessing what excellence really looks like in global higher education. And these are based very much on the university's impact on society and a much broader range of metrics. So we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 17 separate rankings for each of the 17 SDGs. And within that, we have a wealth of data around inclusion, social mobility. We gather data on first-generation students, on the socioeconomic mix of students, on diversity among the student intake, but also diversity among leadership. So we now have this data. We are able to produce rankings based on institutions' contributions to diversity and making the world more equal. But the question is, maybe do we shift more of those metrics and more of those data points into the core world rankings and have a larger section in the world rankings dedicated to a university's social responsibilities? And I think, again, that's a big topic of conversation at the World Academic Summit.
Great. That is a nice segue into our next question. I think this one is probably for Tim. You mentioned networking. That's usually a huge part of the THE summits in person. How do you hope to replicate that element for the virtual summit?
Yep. So at the virtual summit, the functionality of the platform that we've got enables you to Once you log in as an attendee, you can kind of create your profile, put in any picture you choose to put in, your details that you choose to share. And then you can also see who else is there. And you can log in, I believe the platform will actually be open 48 hours in advance of September the 1st. So you can then see who's coming, see who's there, and either reach out to them directly. There's a sort of chat function, so you can then set up a meeting and say, clearly you could set up a meeting outside of the platform and say, you could tweet me or email me on my, academic address, etc. Or you could arrange to meet within the platform and not, it's beyond just chatting. You can also share files or, share information. There'll also be a lot of exhibitors in the virtual exhibition booths. So you can go to those booths and arrange meetings with the people who would be running those booths, managing those booths. There is a networking area, so you can sort of more broadly step into the networking area and see everybody who's there. So you don't necessarily have to do it 48 hours in advance. It can be more spontaneous. But I think the key benefit to this is that you can do your networking when you choose to do your networking. The THE summits, clearly any conference, it's all about the networking, but we all know that you might get a half-hour break where you've got to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, get something to eat, do 25 work emails, respond to something from home, and network with 5 key people all in 25 minutes, which isn't really very easy. So whereas with this, you've got a full, as I said, longer, so almost 90 hours effectively, where you can theoretically see who's there, filter out who you want to have those, it could be one-on-one, but it could also be group conversations with a particular set of people.
And just in terms of the sessions, Tim, will those be available live asynchronously for people to watch? And how soon after the sessions will they be live?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a bit of behind the scenes secrets. Some of the conversations we're having are being pre-recorded because of people's availability. There are certain speakers who we really wanted to be involved, but couldn't make the time on the day. So, for example, our editor John Gill is doing some interviews with a few really interesting people, interesting to me, people like Professor Michael Ignatieff. And so that's taking place a few days before the summit, and that'll be on there. And then clearly, because it's pre-recorded, you can watch it immediately at any time you wish. Whereas the discussions that are taking place live, there's a slight lag. I've been told it's about maybe 15-minute lag from it happening to it being then accessible to watch in your own time. So, if you are in Auckland, for example, then by the time you wake up on the 2nd of September, you don't have to be waiting for things live to come up. You can catch up on everything that you may have missed previously. And equally the same if you're on the other side of the world, then you can watch it as you wish. So I'm losing count because we're still adding bits of content, but I would say there's probably about 50 hours worth of content, maybe even slightly more, that is getting broadcast out across the 48 hours of the summit. But you can watch it as you wish, and also the actual site itself will be open. I think up to Christmas, up to the end of this year. So even if you're not able to watch anything on September 1st, 2nd, you can still drop back in and watch it again, at your own time, right through the autumn.
We've got a couple of questions about rankings, which I will get to, but I'd like to say on the summit, the virtual summit for right now. We've got 2 of them. One person saying that they really like this format and just wondering what sort of virtual attendance element we're planning to work into future events. I'm assuming if we eventually do go back to doing them in person. And the second one is, why are we charging for a digital event?
Who wants to answer that? Is that directed to?
Let's stick with you on the first one, Tim, just in terms of virtual attendance, and then maybe you or Phil could take the second one about charging.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of virtual attendance, I've kind of got my feet in both camps. I love being able to travel and to go to places and see things that I've never seen before, meet new people, etc., and attend real events. But equally, I'm very aware of how difficult it is to do that, how challenging they are, to attend, and how and all the drawbacks that taking place in terms of, time away from your office, your family, your other work, the environmental impact, the cost, the general accessibility. So there's a lot of advantages, I feel, to online events, and the fact that we're able to reach so many more people now than we've done in the past, I'm personally hugely excited about and happy with. So I think, this is something that, together with Phil and other colleagues, we're working on right now, actually, over the next few months, as to what our offering will be next year. But even if there were no pandemic next year at all and no restrictions, I'm pretty confident that we'll be doing a lot more online events in future, and we'll try to be creating a hybrid so that we can continue to go around the world and facilitate the real interactions that can take place when you're face to face, but equally enable that to be able to be accessible to frankly thousands more people than previously have been able to come to conferences.
Yeah, just to take on that point and the second point, Tim's absolutely right. One of the things that the pandemic has been a terrible global crisis, but I've been extremely happy that the Times Higher Education community has been able to come together. We've engaged, I think, 6,000-7,000 individuals across 2020 since the pandemic began in March, or certainly since the lockdown began in March, and that's been an incredibly exciting opportunity. And that's far more than we would have engaged in our face-to-face events, although we're incredibly proud of that. We have surveyed our audience. Several hundred of our community have talked about their appetite, and of course budgets are being cut. Flying and some of these additional elements are being cut as a result of the financial pain of the pandemic. Obviously the closure of borders I think will last, and people's willingness and ability to travel will really be diminished through into 2021, but we're very keen on keeping a hybrid version. People want to get back to face. A lot of our community do say they value the serendipity and the networking opportunities that come from face-to-face. We are doing an incredible job of replicating that online with this platform, the iVent platform, and we really have built in a lot of networking opportunities and functionality into the online systems, but people want to get back face-to-face as well, so we'll definitely do a hybrid. As regards to the charging, we've actually since the lockdown began in March, I think we've run more than 10 online events. We started off on Zoom, having 2,000, 3,000 people on Zoom together, which was quite interesting. And we've moved into this much more sophisticated virtual platform. Everything we've done so far has been entirely free, and everything we'll do after the World Academic Summit will be free as well. We're really looking to do engagement this year, not focus too much on the commercial side. But I think with World, we had a very strong sense that this is, as Tim said, 50 hours of extremely high quality content. We've gathered the world's leaders of the world's greatest universities. We have more than 100 university presidents in the room. And our sense was actually we wanted people just to make that commitment to be fully engaged and immersed. So we're charging a very modest fee to ensure that those people are actually very much part of a community that has fully engaged in the opportunities. But we do have all sorts of bursaries, and we have all sorts of opportunities to engage with people who perhaps have a challenge in meeting the delegate fee. So we're really happy to hear from people through the website if they want to look at bursaries or scholarships, so we can make sure we're inclusive. But yeah, we're attracting delegates from all corners of the world across all continents, so we're really excited about that.
Yeah, and I would add that we have got a significantly reduced fee for delegates who are coming from countries that we classify as emerging economies using some FTSE data. So if you're in Pakistan, for example, it's a significantly reduced fee. I think it's 80% off the quoted fee that's on the website. So we really do want to make sure that it's the value of the conversation is really, I think, dependent on the breadth and diversity of the conversation. So that's a key target for us.
All right, we've got another one asking about what rankings content will we have at the summit. Phil, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so it's a great opportunity to meet the rankings team. Ellie Bothwell, the rankings editor, will be in and around the summit, involved in some of the sessions, but actually the data team behind the rankings will be there in force. So Duncan Ross, the chief data officer, myself, and Mohammed Asati, the senior vice president at Elsevier, who's responsible for some of the data. We will present the data live, so not just the results, the headline beauty parade. We'll do an in-depth delve into what the results are telling us in terms of longitudinal trends, in terms of specific bits of intelligence that we can gather from the data. You know, we have an analysis of 86 million citations, almost 14 million research papers have gone into this ranking. So we've got a vast opportunity to study what it actually means, what it tells us about the global sector. So that's the live launch session, but we'll also have a whole range of what we call masterclasses with the data specialists, looking at our impact rankings, looking at specific aspects of the rankings, such as the reputation data. What does it tell us about the changing profile of universities globally? What can we learn from that data in terms of university strategic opportunities? So there'll be a wide range of sessions, but also THE staff will be there. They'll have filled in their profile. They'll be available to be contacted for one-on-one conversations. We've got various booths and exhibition spaces, so we're all available for interaction and one-to-one conversations about the data, the rankings, and how we might advise the sector to learn from this wealth of data that we have.
And there's also there'll be individual SDG-based instructional videos of how to submit data into the rankings, you know, particularly for our impact rankings. As Phil mentioned before, we're in the process of the data submission period now. So it's, you know, if you're considering you'd like to be part of this ranking, or you are going to be part of it, but you're, you know, struggling to get all the data correct, you know, there's just instructional guidance videos of how to do that and responding to the, you know, the most frequently asked questions and things. So if you want to participate, then you know, there's plenty there to help you on that way.
Great. I've got another rankings question, but just another reminder for people who have maybe recently joined us. If you would like to submit a question, please do in the live chat feed on the right hand of your page. So let's go to another one about the rankings, which is universities with transnational operations allow their offshore partners to be creative with projecting the rankings of THE to the local audience, although most parameters don't apply. Can we stop this? Phil, that sounds like another one for you.
That's a good question. Actually, there was a couple of recent investigations by the British Advertising Standards Authority, and I think the equivalent body in Australia, that did consider how universities communicate their ranking positions. Now, obviously, Times Higher, we publish the data, we make it available, people can scrutinize it on our own websites, and we can't control everything that universities say about the data. But where there's a case of universities misrepresenting the data or simply not being honest about the data, which I hope is extremely rare, we would like to know, and we certainly would ask those universities to desist. And if there was a concern about that sort of abuse, you know, we do have the various, not to sound like a regulatory authority, we are very much here to hold a mirror to the community, but you know, we have various mechanisms to perhaps exclude an institution from a ranking if they're misrepresenting their data or misrepresenting the results. But I'd always say come back to the original source. You can verify these claims by using the rankings, and I would absolutely always say to students in particular and academics looking at career moves, come to the original source where you can look at the data in the correct context, and you can find out an awful lot more about the institution involved and about the whole infrastructure around your journey with all of our content.
And Phil, now that we've got you here, I'm wondering if you could give us any sort of teasers or what we could look out for in September, or anything that has surprised you about the results for the World University Rankings this year.
I think the biggest surprise for me is a bit of a technical one, really, but the biggest surprise is we got almost 2,000 universities submitting data. So Times Higher Education has a very inclusive voluntary system. All the universities we rank have actively chosen to take part. We think it's a really nice part of this thing that we don't scrape data on anyone. We don't sit outside and judge them. We ask for a relationship with them. A lot of our data is entirely independent of the university, but we also ask the university to provide basic information about themselves around their staff numbers, their student numbers, their income, And of course, we verify that across various sources, and we have a whole bunch of quality assurance systems in place. But the surprise for me was that actually we were collecting the data this year right through the pandemic, and we've had a record number of submissions, 1,993 universities submitted. And that's allowed us, they're not all fully eligible, they don't all make the cut, but it has allowed us to rank for the first time in our history more than 1,500 universities. That's 1,527 from 93 countries or regions. So it will be the most comprehensive, the biggest, the richest analysis we've ever carried out in our history, and despite a pandemic. So it really does show that the universities really value these international benchmarks, really value the intelligence that this ranking brings to the sector, not just in terms of that marketing advantage and the what I call the beauty parade, but actually in terms of really serious intelligence on how their institutions measure up across 13 metrics across 93 countries. So that's been incredibly inspiring. The other stuff I think I'll perhaps leave till the launch on the 2nd of September. I can't give too much away, but I do think, you know, this trend of China in particular rising, I think we'll see that continue. I say, I think we'll see that continue. We will, but how much is something I'll leave to the 2nd of September. The other thing that really strikes me actually is over the last 5 or 6 years with consistent methodology, we have seen this quite significant rebalancing of what you might describe as power in the knowledge economy from the West to the East. The US has been losing ground in the sort of upper echelons, the UK and Europe, which I now describe separately because of Brexit and because of the system differences. They've been losing ground, and East Asian nations, not just China, but South Korea and others have been really gaining ground. So I think that the big story for me is, will that west to east shift continue? And what would that mean in terms of the current geopolitical war between, you know, Trump and President Xi, the China-US row, and the crisis? Will we actually see this crisis speed up this west to east imbalance? You know, the Western universities in the UK, in particular in America, will suffer, I think, much worse from coronavirus because they're so much more dependent on international student income, for example, and that will be lost in the short term. And that cross-subsidizes research. The flows of talent could be permanently altered, particularly in regards to perceptions of safety, how well nations have handled the crisis. And let's face it, the UK and US aren't looking particularly good in terms of how they've managed the health crisis. And then issues like nationalism and the rise of xenophobia also affecting possible talent flow. So the biggie for me is, will that shift continue, and actually how much can we predict that accelerating as a result of the crisis?
I think that's interesting, though, that just to follow on from what you were saying there, Phil, because I'll give you another sneak preview of the summit. In the summit, Merrick Gertler, the president of the University of Toronto, he talks a bit about you know, the power of place and how that might be affected. And he was asked about where he would, you know, if he was to set up a brand new university and he was given an enormous budget to put in a bricks and mortar campus anywhere in the world, you know, what are the key factors that would influence his decision on that? And he had sort of 4 overarching points, which might not necessarily be what everyone expects. You know, the first was that there's a really good labour market, because he pointed out that, you know, talented academics often don't just travel on their own. They need to have, you know, may have a spouse as well who also would be looking to have some work. You need a really good public sector, really effective provision of, you know, education, hospital services, you know, public amenities, things like that. He said you really needed to have academic freedom. He felt that was very important and still very attractive. And then he also said that you wanted to be in a place that's got a very positive and welcoming regulatory environment in terms of immigration, and therefore equally perhaps a society that's very warm and accepting towards diversity and a multicultural society. You know, he felt those are the 4 key factors that you know, are most critical to create a successful university. You know, if you're starting from scratch, historical legacies aside. So I do think that, you know, those are 4 factors that actually are still very much, you know, apart from perhaps the current governments in the US and the UK on point 4 of Merrick's recipe for success. But those are still factors that are still heavily weighted towards what we might describe as the global north. So how much change there'll really be, I'm not sure. Any government that has currently got a successful higher education system, must be trying to pull every lever they can to preserve that success, whether it be through funding or through, beneficial, relationships in terms of the flows of talent, the flows of capital. So I'm not so confident that there'll be such a wholesale change as others might think.
Going back to the summit content, Tim, we've got a question here saying that the agenda looks like it's suited for a British schedule, and they're wondering what content there would be for Asian or Australasian audiences.
Well, as we said, the content is all available on demand, so it's only some of the live sessions that are clearly a bit more weighted towards a European time zones. But we will have, particularly in relation to rankings and data, we're going to have some special country-specific live masterclasses that focus on India and Korea and China, I believe, and also Australia. And those will be at a time zone that's much more comfortable for people in those countries. And there'll also be a special presidents-only session taking place on September the 2nd, which would be in the sort of mid-afternoon for people in those time zones, where they can discuss in private their issues of sort of leading through this crisis. But we hope that because of the functionality that we have with the online, it won't be too disruptive for people who aren't perhaps able to watch the whole summit live, but still feel that they can take part. And as I said, arrange their own networking. I mean, just because I won't necessarily be online for 48 hours doesn't mean that, I'm going to close the door and switch the lights off when I go to bed. Everybody else can still take part and be in the virtual site and have those meetings, have that interaction. So it's a lot more than just purely the live sessions that are taking place.
And I think you may have answered this one earlier, but remind us how long the content will be available online after the event.
I have been told, and I actually am just telling you, it's 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah, so everyone's got basically the whole of September to watch any of the content that takes place over the course of the summit.
Excellent. And we've got one more question here. We've just got a few more minutes. So for anyone who's been sitting on a question, but they've just been dying to answer it, now is your chance. One more question here. It's slightly unrelated, but potentially very much related to the topic that we've been speaking about a new dawn in HE, which is the theme of our World Academic Summit. Ben is asking, will it possibly be easier for UK students to get places due to the lack of internationals? Which I'm sure is something that parents and students alike are thinking about, not just in the UK, but perhaps in other countries where there is a big population of international students. Any thoughts about what universities' behavior around admissions will be if there are fewer international students around?
I think in terms of the major recruiting markets like America, Britain and Australia, and to some extent Canada as well, I think I'm quite confident we'll see what we probably describe as a buyer's market. I think there is now a sense that they will lose significant amounts, or some institutions in those markets will lose significant amounts of income from international students. And they will be, I think it's fair to say, some of them who are very dependent will be desperate for talent. They want students to enroll. Now, there's an issue around safety, there's an issue around what they can deliver for students on campus. But for me, there's no sense that even outside the immediate crisis, there will be a long-term shift where there's more competition for the talent. And if you're a talented student, I think you have more power. You're in the driving seat. So you may well be able to negotiate on admission requirements. You may well be able to get entry into universities who might be much more flexible on their grade requirements, for example. And even long term, I think there might even be pressure on the financial models and what students are able to demand from their institutions in terms of additional support, flexibility, and services. So my sense is, yeah, there's probably this will help a shift towards a buyer's market and a much more approach like the customer is always right.
Yeah, and I especially think with the shift to online, that will just open up universities' capacity to accept more students, different kinds of students, and offer education in different types of ways and formats and times. So hopefully that will also open it up to domestic students. Okay, I don't know if we'll be able to answer this one, Olga, but there's a question about a general estimate of the percentage decrease in universities' income due to the pandemic. I know there's been some data about this from Australian universities, and there have definitely been forecasts from the OFS here. Any thoughts on that, Phil or Tim?
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the projections, I mean, in Britain, they said a worst case scenario could be about 19 billion pounds, I think, but that was seen as a pessimistic estimate, which represents a huge chunk of income. But there's no question, big universities with major international audiences of students, like Manchester, for example. I think they're over 100 million in Australia. Similar figures, hundreds of millions of Australian dollars lost. So they're massive. They vary dramatically, of course, in terms of the proportion of overall income. But yeah, I mean, there's I think the IMF predicted that maybe 13 British universities could theoretically collapse, actually fail. There's lots of, we did a university leaders survey over the spring, March, April, May, and there was a very high levels of university presidents predicting bankruptcies in both America and in Britain. So it varies very dramatically by institution, but overall it's going to be very painful.
Certainly, and the other question would be kind of where's the cutoff point? I mean, they're going to be income loss massively in 2020, and I suspect even deeper cuts to budgets in 2021. So it's kind of like where do you draw the line in the sand in terms of saying what's related to the pandemic and what are the, I guess, knock-on effects from the pandemic? We've got one more question here about networking, Tim, at the event. We've heard of virtual having an equalizing effect. What benefits are there for less established researchers or academics at the virtual event, and how will this help them?
It's a good question. I mean, I suppose, well, not to be too repetitive, but it is quite literally a equalizing effect where, everybody's got, the same kind of size of avatar, as it were, and the same kind of status. So there's no real reason. Sometimes you walk into a conference space and you might see someone you want to speak to, but they're already surrounded by 15 other people or something like that. And personally, I feel intimidated by that kind of scenario, or I don't want to add on to. I won't get picked, as it were, to ask my question. Whereas in this case, you can reach out and it's up to the person who whether or not they wish to respond, and it means that it's a completely level playing field, as it were, as to who you choose to interact with. I mean, clearly, from a sort of safeguarding perspective, you could block somebody, or you don't have to respond to somebody who you don't wish to interact with. But on the other hand, it's there so that anyone who you feel you've got an interest in, and might want to ask a question, whether they're a president or another person who's an academic in your own field, or you haven't been able to connect with otherwise, you can do that.
Excellent. Just in the last few minutes that we have, Tim, do you want to give us the details of exactly when the summit is, when people should be registering by, how the logistics behind all of that?
Yes, I should be able to do that. So the summit takes place from September the 1st, 2nd, but the actual site will be open, I believe, 48 hours earlier, from August the 30th, where there'll be certain instructional videos and how-tos and stuff like that will already be there. So you can, by all means, once you register, you can go in, create your profile, start arranging that networking. But the first live sessions will start to go up on September 1st, and then our first live discussion is actually taking place from 0900 UK time on September 1st. And then the whole place is open and for the whole of September. So even if you've missed the final discussion, which finishes on the late afternoon UK time of September 2nd, you can then carry on and watch it and make use of the space as you choose to. You can access the summit. It's timeshigherEducation.com/summits/worldacademic/2020. But if you basically go to timeshigherEducation.com, it's pretty easy to find. And were there any other sort of key bits of information I've forgotten? There must be something.
If someone doesn't register before September 1st and maybe they have forgotten about it or see it and they want to register once the summit has already started, is that possible?
Yeah, it should be possible. That is such a good question. I don't know the answer, but it should be possible. Certainly before September 2nd, but probably not after September 2nd. So all the post-event content will only be available to people who've registered before the event starts.
Excellent. And we've got one more question about free events. Could you tell us what other free events you've got planned for this year?
Yeah, so we've got on September 18th, we've got a student success forum that's taking place, and that's actually focused on sort of two key regions of the world, Europe and North America, and ties in with our launch of our US college ranking that we've been running for the last 4 years now, I believe. And so that's happening September 18th. We've got a digital transformation event, which is taking place. I'm going to just bear with me, maybe look it up so I don't get the date wrong. Excuse me, I should have this already. But it's
21st of October, I think.
21st October, that's what I was thinking, but it's, yeah, absolutely. And then we've got our THE Live event, which is taking place in November, on the 17th of November. And that's focused on Asia, and it's also the announcement of our THE Asia Awards. So that's happening, timing-wise, much more orientated towards an Asian audience. So it's very early in the morning for UK and the afternoon for those in Asia. We've got a leadership and management event, which will be taking place in November as well, which is a one-day summit. And we've got our THE Live UK event, which is taking place on the 25th and 26th of November. And so that's a whole series of conversations and workshops that is going to be very much directed at the UK.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Phil, any final closing remarks about the World University Rankings launch?
Just a suggestion that it's not to be missed. There are some genuinely interesting movements. Going back to the analogy of the beauty parade, there will be some significant movement at the very top of the table in that top 10 zone, which I think will raise some eyebrows. But beyond that, really, it is about, for me, it's about the longer term, bigger picture trends and whether we are seeing a real shift in global higher education. But yeah, lots of individual stories and success stories and concerns. But yeah, lots and lots of analysis, lots of time for Q&A. And obviously we'll be available, the whole team will be available on that World Academic Summit platform for on and off for the 48 hours, but also beyond that in terms of people's ability to talk to us and network with us and reach us and challenge us and scrutinize us for the work that we do in ranking all these universities.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for asking us some great questions. This was very much an experimental activity for us, but I appreciate everyone who's taken the time to come on. If you do want any more information about the summit, just a reminder, it's timeshighereducation.com/summits. You can also find information about the rankings and everything that you hopefully would want to know. I think we'll be putting this up online and we'll be publishing some more information about the summit. So be sure to check back to our website if you do have any other questions that maybe you didn't think of today. So thank you very much, everyone. Tim, Phil, thank you for bearing with.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.